I guess we need an intro. Let's go.
What is good, everybody? Welcome back to the podcast, Exitpreneur 360. And oh man, it feels like a little while since I recorded an episode because I've been spending quite a lot of time actually in a bit of a strategic place. Just thinking about what is the strategy, what is the next couple of months and the next stage of the podcast look like post launch. And that brings me on to sort of today's guest, because, I've had a thought about now that the launch has happened and the reaction's been so great to the podcast. I really appreciate everybody's reached out and everybody who continues to stay involved and ask questions and communicate and ask to share things and do everything that, just get involved. It's been so lovely. But one of the things that I want to do is I really want this podcast to be as valuable practically for people as possible. And I realized, obviously, it's an entrepreneurial podcast. It's about business, I think, is one of the main themes. But the 360, as I explained in one of the previous episodes, is all about it being holistic about our lives, about every part of our lives. And so what I'm going to be doing over the next few episodes and over the next few months, you'll start to notice a bit of a pattern is we'll have weekly podcasts, but each week we'll be tackling a different element of the Exitpreneur 360 mindset and themes. And when it comes to the entrepreneurial, the business side of things, I gave it a lot of thought, and I was, how can I make this as valuable as possible to young and old and new and experienced entrepreneurs, or just business people in general who want to get something valuable and practical out of the podcast. And while I was going through that stage of thinking about how can I do this, I was lucky enough to be reached out to after the launch by a very old friend of mine. And by old, I mean, I think we go back to 5 years old, 6 years old, if I'm not wrong. Literally grade one, Sandringham Primary School, naughty little shits is the best that I can put it. So he reached out to me and he was like, dude, I love what you're doing. Keep going and all that. And I said, dude, in my eyes, you are the archetypal successful entrepreneur. Would you be willing to come to the podcast and share some of what you know? And he didn't even miss a beat. He's like, yeah, dude, 100%, because he's that kind of guy. So I want to introduce an old mate, Shaun Els. The name will probably ring a bell because the guy's done a fair amount in the world of business in South Africa and he's now in the UK. Shaunie, how are you, my brother? Nice to see you.
Hello, Stevie. Greetings from the UK. It was fascinating to hear from you, and I heard from you before we actually spoke, and that was through your first podcast where you captured your journey, and I think a lot of that resonated with me because, as you mentioned, I was there for a large part of it, right? I think from a very young age, your journey through cancer. And then through our sporting days, we played a lot of cricket together. And you were pretty good, by the way.
As were you.
I've still got a photograph of us. It was you, me, and I can't remember. And Jerry.
Jerry, I was going to say, it must have been Jerry.
Triple wicket cricket. So we were young and full of beans back then. And here we are now. A little bit older, a little bit grayer. But young, absolutely young at heart. And that's it. Yeah. So reaching out to you, I really thought that you were onto something, and I won't lie, it was something that I thought about for a number of years. Is, this: how do you capture your journey? How do you send a message out to the world that is perhaps quite unique to yourself, but everyone has their story to tell? And then how do you bolt on sort of things to make it interesting for people to hear? So I guess here we are.
You actually, that last sentence that you just said pretty much summed up the Exitpreneur 360 podcast for me, or this whole journey for me. Is I'm putting my message out there, I'm putting my journey, I'm sharing what I'm going through with people in my life and hopefully beyond. And it's purely about, it's a little bit of a narcissistic play, I guess you could say, because it's all about me and it's what I'm going through. But I'm at the stage now where, as you said, exactly what you said, I'm bolting on those pieces that are important to me: health, mindset, business, family, community. I'm bolting all those pieces on, and I'm coming to people like you to get help in doing that, because a guy like you has been through, from a business perspective especially, you've done exceptional things, and you've been very successful, and you've done some really interesting things as well, which is what I think you'll bring to the table. So with that in mind, I mean, what I'd like to do in this episode, just very briefly, as I said, is I'd like to keep you coming back. Shaun will hopefully be if you'll have me, and if you'll keep showing up, will hopefully be a recurring part of the podcast, because he's got an exceptional amount of value to add and advice to give to young and old. I reckon he's been there and he's done it. So Shawnee, please just run us through in this episode. I just want to let the listeners understand who you are, what your background is from a life perspective, from a business perspective, and go for it.
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. I think when I started out, the word entrepreneur wasn't so loosely used as it is today. I think everyone's an entrepreneur if they work from a coffee shop doing something right. I think to me it means a little bit more than that. So I'll start a little bit about my history, how I started, where that all began, and then sort of move through the years and just get a little bit more detailed. And we can stop wherever you want to stop and dig into some of that stuff. So essentially, about 20 years ago, I started a small business that was manufacturing and designing men's jewelry. Although it was a very, very small niche, myself and my business partner, Victor Barboza, thought we'd come up with an idea where we would be able to, I suppose, express ourselves and find a way to generate revenue out of that, but doing it part-time, because at the time we were both working full-time jobs. We took a big risk. We had a small amount of capital. I can't remember where we got that from, but when I say small, it was probably less than about $5,000. We went to a jeweler. I was in the diamond industry at the time. I was working for someone, so I had a few contacts in that. We went away, we designed some stuff, and we had it manufactured, and we would hold small days at coffee shops where we'd invite people, guests, friends, family. They'd come and they'd buy, and we generated a little bit of cash. Needless to say, that didn't work out the way that it should have, but what that did provide for me was the opportunity to get a feel for what it is that I was doing, and whether or not this was enjoyable, and if it was exciting me to get out of bed and continue to create. And then at that time, probably 15, 17 years ago in South Africa, we didn't have options like we do now. Zara wasn't around. Topshop hadn't come to South Africa, although it closed a few years ago. We're very limited for options. So myself and Vic decided to get into the fashion industry, where we really, really found our passion. I suppose the jewelry led us into something a little bit bigger than that. We lived in the UK about 22, 23 years ago, and our favorite pastime was to go shopping. We had options upon options upon options. We'd work our 5-day, 6-day week, and then when we got a free day, we'd go shopping. And we'd just look at all the stores. We'd look at the way people would merchandise things, the immersive nature of retail in the UK versus what was available in South Africa. It was really watered down and just didn't have that experience that we believed getting into a venture like fashion retail, we could provide the market. So roll on a year after that, 2006, we open up our first multi-branded store in Birdhaven, in Melrose, Johannesburg. And we came up with a beautiful concept, but we just didn't necessarily have the stock to fill it. So we got on a plane with 2 empty suitcases, and we crammed as much as we could in those 2 bags, brought it back, put a markup on it, and quickly got to work on trying to figure out, well, we had a hit list of international brands that we wanted to bring to South Africa and get them entrenched in the South African market. And at the time, the big one for us was taking G-Star on as a brand. It was a brand out of Amsterdam, a well-known denim brand, which was massive, massive at the time. If you could work with these guys, you'd basically reach the pinnacle in our sector. We nagged the guy. We nagged him relentlessly. I think he even begged us to stop calling him at one stage, but we never gave it. We never gave up. Eventually, he buckled. He said, "Look, I'm working with someone else in South Africa, but you guys just won't leave me alone." Not necessarily what he said. You can imagine some of the other words that he used, but he said, "Look, come and see me, and let's discuss business." So I arrive in Amsterdam on my first trip to come and see this guy, and he gets held up at an airport somewhere else in Europe, and I never get to see him. So I made this trip all the way to the Netherlands, Amsterdam. Not that we could afford to be there. Got on the next plane, came back. But little did I know that he owed me one after that, right? Guy comes across the world to see you from the southern tip of Africa. He arrives in Amsterdam, and you aren't there to meet him. It's just poor business practice, right? So he owes me one now. And I think in his feeling bad about the whole thing, that opened the door a little bit, and we kicked it open as we would naturally do. And we were the second guys working with this brand in SA, ultimately leading to bigger and better things. We started to add new brands into the mix, so we didn't need to travel to buy stock to put markups on to get going. We started to deal with businesses directly and started to become a real force in the industry. And that led us to a brand called SuperDry in 2010. We opened our first store in 2011.
Just a bit of a name drop there, hey?
Yeah, little name drop.
It's good to know where guys got their gear, bro. Everyone rocks SuperDry, yeah.
For sure. So that was about 12 years ago now, give or take. We opened the first store in Santon City. Also, God knows how we got that. A friend of ours, Shaun Els, was a friend or the nephew or godson of the head leasing agent, Santon City. We called on a favor. We continued to network throughout all these years, and we learned the art and the value of networking. Just keeping in touch with people who could teach you something, keep in touch with people who were masters of their craft. There's always a lesson in a conversation. I've always been a really good listener. If I sat at a table with people, I love to listen. I love to engage.
Yeah, I remember that about you, dude. You've always been, don't take it the wrong way, you've always been very soft-spoken. And that's why, actually, frankly, I was quite taken aback or surprised that you said, dude, I'm in, I'll come on the podcast and I'll contribute, because I've always known you as the guy who's the soft, strong in the corner kind of guy, not the, hey, get out there in front of the camera kind of guy. So the fact that to hear you say that you're a good listener, and you've always been a good listener, it's how I've always known you. Interesting, hey?
Stevie, for me, it's always been the biggest determinant of bullshit in a room is to listen before you answer, right? And sometimes just taking in the information, and that's how I kind of put you in your hierarchy in my head, is by listening to you and what value you add. And a lot of the time you can hear when guys are talking utter shit, and you can hear when a guy's got a strong command of what he's talking about. I've always been that guy. So roll on to 10 or 12 SuperDry stores. We landed up selling that business in 2017. In the background, we were working with another brand called Scotch and Soda. We still own the 6 or 7 Scotch and Soda stores in South Africa. We've just recently opened Scotch and Soda Carnaby Street in London. So we've taken on the UK agency for Scotch and Soda.
Congrats, man.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been quite a journey on that front. And then in 2017, after the sale of that SuperDry business, we started a brand called Naked Coffee and Kitchen Bar. It was a small little hole in the wall in Melrose, which was a bolt-on to our fashion business. And we thought, well, if we could encapsulate an experience where people would come and have the best coffee in South Africa, which is all opinion driven, by the way, the best coffee in South Africa, and slow down the shopping experience. So we'd offer you a coffee, you could sit, you could work from our space, and we would entice you over time to spend some money in the store. And it created a tremendous energy for the business. And in 2017, we unbolted that Naked, and we put it into a full format store with a kitchen, and almost became it still is today, one of the brunch places in Joburg and Cape Town. And we continue to pursue that journey. Naked has 7 outlets now and continuing to thrive. So very proud of that too. That was a concept that was sort of a very, very first sort of branded concept that belonged to us. Didn't belong to anyone else. A lot of our model relied on taking other people's concepts and making them work in our territories. So sort of following the franchise rules from a head office perspective and doing it there. Naked isn't that. We are a franchise business now. We are the franchisor, and we deal with franchisees that are incoming very, very shortly. So that's been a tremendous success. It's been a hell of a lot of hard work. I've been out of that business now for close on 4 years, and Vic handles that on a day-to-day basis. But the 3 years that I was in the startup phase of that business was truly challenging. A lot of moving parts. I've often compared that business to running a small country. You know, you've got one president, and you've got people, and you've got unskilled laborers, you've got skilled laborers, and you've just got turnover of staff all the time. You're creating a process, you're ordering for it, you're creating the process, it's going out to the customer, and then you've got the aftermarket service for dealing with the customers on the back end and their reviews. So that cycle starts every single day. It's a small economy and very, very difficult to run, but when you get it right, there's a lot of reward. So that sort of sums up the South African element over about 17 years of entrepreneurship in the local market. If you'd like me to move on to the UK, or you want to discuss anything in that. So 4.5 years ago, my family and I made a decision to move to the UK. I felt that, you know, although it was a very, very tough decision to make, it was the right decision. I really, within myself, needed a new challenge. My wife got offered a great opportunity in the UK, which would allow us to go. I worried about the kids, and I worried about letting go of a very comfortable life, letting go of something that was pretty well settled. I had achieved a lot of the goals that I wanted to in my life at that age. And I just turned 40, or about to turn 40. So I was young enough to make the transition, young enough to make that decision and understand the consequences. But nothing would ever prepare you for the 3 or 4 years that was about to come. It was a complete sort of rebranding of oneself. I spoke about it a little bit earlier, about your network being one of the most important things you could ever leverage off in your life. I never had any network in the UK when I moved here. I perhaps discounted that one important point. Even just getting here, wondering if I have a blocked toilet or one of the drains is blocked. I don't even have a plumber when I arrive. Who do I call? How do I know I'm not getting ripped off? So all the little things, when you make big decisions, you have to always seriously consider the smallest of consequences. And I quickly realized that I needed to build a network. So I started to get in touch with people that I was working with in the past. So back to the South African business, there was always an element of international dealings. So I reached out and I started having regular conversations with people about business opportunities, if there was anything on the go. And slowly but surely, guys warmed up to the idea. And about 3 years ago now, I met with a guy for lunch, and he was speaking about an opportunity that he was involved in. It was once again in the fashion business that one of the founders of SuperDry had started sort of pre-COVID, ran through COVID, ran into a little bit of shit, and was now in administration. And the idea was, this is a tremendous opportunity. The opportunity was a brand called Jackets, JACK1T, and it specialized in outerwear, puffer jackets. Alpine streetwear was what was being touted at the time. And I said to the guy, I said, so what is it that you're looking for? He said, well, number one, I'm looking for money. Number two, I'm looking for management. I said, well, being as though the rand is sort of 24-1 at any stage, don't know if I can find the money in a hurry. I had some of my own. I knew I would have probably needed to raise more, but with management, I can structure, I can manage, I understand how these businesses work. I've lived and breathed them for many, many years of my life. I know the environment. I think it's a project I'd love to take on. So I said, give me a couple of months. I'm going to need to understand what the business did, what shit the business ran into, and why it didn't work, and what improvements would need to be made in order to make this journey a success. So we got to work on the project, and I started to reach out to some of my South African connections that I believe would be candidates to help raise funding. Funding is never the easiest part of any process. Trying to get somebody to part with their hard-earned bucks and put them on your back and say, go jockey, go, is never easy. So I reached out to a lot of guys. I had a lot of doors slammed in my face. I had a lot of guys saying, look, we're interested, and drag you along the way to the point where you're shaking hands on a deal, and then you get that call on Monday, which is cold sweat stuff. Sorry, we've had a change of heart. Had some time to think of it over the weekend. We're not interested. So I took a bold move to put half the investment in myself, knowing that somewhere along the line, I will find the other 50% of the money required. So I reached out to my business partner, a guy called Wayne Nestat, and I convinced him to get involved. It wouldn't necessarily be his natural choice of industry because he doesn't know too much about it at the time. Say 3 years on now, he's kind of come into his own. He understands it, loves the business. And there was a huge learning curve for everyone along the journey, right? Yeah. I had to piece this puzzle together. We had production, right, which was a super important element of the process. We had sales. So once we'd produced, who would handle the sales? Those were the two pillars in the business at that particular point in time. They have a strong history in understanding those two parts of the process. And then we started to add in sort of e-com specialists, started to add in what marketing and customer services and sort of integration members. So the whole thing started to take shape over the 6 months from the time that we'd met to the time that we sort of took over the IP and started to make the process work. So from the designing to the tech pack stuff that goes to factories, to the manufacturing part, then to the logistic part, and then to get it out to your partners, was quite an amazing 18 months. Probably the wildest ride I've ever been on in my life. It was like having the lights off for 16 of those months, and then someone's just switched the light switch on, and it was just an amazing reception to the hard work that we'd done, and such a validation to know at that particular point I had found my next calling or the next path. And I suppose the point on that, Steve, is I'm not sure if you've ever looked to certain places for guidance, like you look for signs from whether it's the universe or signs from things to kind of just validate or just give you a sort of push on the back and say, keep going. You're in a comfortable place. You're doing the right thing. Although at the time it never feels so, because you're only asking those questions because you're under a massive amount of pressure, and you need to find and dig deep within to keep going. Yeah. So that kind of sums up the last 17 years of a career and the last 4 years of a really testing, challenging part. And I'm leaving out all of the other sort of personal concerns and sort of kids and how they got integrated into the system and all of that stuff. That's just from a business perspective.
Sure. Well, brother, listen, let me tell you, I mean, based on what you've just shared, firstly, it's awesome to hear your story. I mean, obviously I've known you forever, but we haven't connected for a long while. I'm stoked to hear your story. You've touched on so much there. I mean, there's individual lessons that we could delve into, and that's what I think the plan is for the future, for the next coming months, is to pick your brain and to, from your perspective of an entrepreneur and my perspective of an entrepreneur, coming from a bit of a corporate vibe where I was also doing a lot of, we see the world differently, and you obviously have learned lessons that I haven't, and I've maybe learned lessons that you haven't. So, and also what you've ended off there saying about how the kids and the life lessons that you've learned is also so important, that I hope we can get to as well. I think that's something else that I'd love to get through, because I know that you've got a wife, you've got kids, you've done the immigration. That's another conversation as well. Is people who are listening to this potentially are going, shit, man, this is one of those guys who did immigrate and they took that risk, and they went to the other side, and they're talking about not having a network, and what else can he share there? So I think you've got some stuff to share there as well. It's a journey that I've been on for 2 years as well in LA. And so I know exactly what you're saying, but you don't know who the plumber is. You don't know where you're going to get your, how you're going to get the light. Who do you go to pay your light bill? Kind of, it's like, it's a crazy. How do you do the washing in the building? That kind of thing.
It's a completely different process with a completely it's a different set of rules. Yeah. And it's a book that often you don't read before you arrive. Yeah. And it's not even a written book.
Yeah.
It's a different set of circumstances completely. I'll go back to the beginning part of the conversation, and you mentioned I was always one of the soft-spoken guys, and I think you asked why I would be willing to come on and sort of have these discussions with you. I think a lot of the time is when we, especially our generation and the generations before us, as men, especially men, we're often taught to bottle up everything, bottle emotion, right? Don't let them know your next move. Keep quiet about it, right? In my family, we call it the old carpet, where you sweep it under and eventually it becomes a hump, right? And no one can walk over it because there's so many things that are hidden there, so much emotion, so much stuff, so many lessons. And I think the most important part is no one wants to hear you crying, but people do want to hear your lessons and do want to hear your journey and do want to understand, especially for younger guys looking to go, well, how do I even begin? Where do I start? Right? We've always learned from our elders, and I think nothing will change with us. We always have to learn from people who are older and more mature than us, and with more experience, right? And everyone's got their own lesson. I think you can learn something special from anyone on this planet.
Because I'm so glad you actually brought that up. I've been waiting for someone to bring it up organically on the podcast, because it's a topic and a theme that I've been a little bit, not nervous, but it's a very hot topic at the moment in the world. You can literally, you can get banned off of YouTube channel, struck kind of thing, for discussing things like men's mental health and things like that. And the reality, and I understand why. There's some of those crazy guys out there who do go a bit too far and take the whole men's right thing like to the extreme, and like it goes into the realm of woman bashing. But I'm glad that you've brought it up, because it allows me to open up that door, and that's something else that I'd like to in the future discuss with you. There is definitely a need for the males of this world, the young males especially, to understand that sometimes you do need to talk about stuff, and you do need to ask for help and support, and you do need to say, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you give me some help? And I'm going through some stuff, man. Can you help me get through it? Because as you say, bro, we were brought up in a world where you were discouraged from doing that. And I think the kids of today, the young men of today, there's very little, there's either these extreme role models who are often, as I say, these like woman haters, or there's like no role models, and you got these guys being beta males who just don't actually stand up for themselves and don't actually go for what they want to go for. So, dude, I'm going to bring that up in the future as well. I think
I suppose we've got to be sensitive to everything, right? But I think the most important thing is that if you've got a lesson and you've done something significant with your life, I suppose we come from two places, right? A lot of people can speak from failure. A lot of people can speak from success. And I suppose it just depends on who you want to listen to. But the most important part is that people do need to speak up a little bit more. Bottling things up inside does no one any good. And express yourself. If you've got a question, ask it. I always say it in my own business. No such thing as a stupid question. I'm dealing with people in their 40s and 50s who sometimes are too embarrassed to ask fundamental questions that they might have missed along the way. If you ask a stupid question, you're only stupid if you ask it twice.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So so Stevie, it's been a wild journey, and a wild journey that is starting to settle nicely now, and I'm quite proud of it. I can see the changes in myself, which obviously then reflect on my family, and then once again in the business realm. So it's been great.
Beautiful, my dude. What an intro, bro. What an intro. This is what I wanted in this episode. I wanted people to learn who you are, because you are going to be a recurring character in this journey and this story. Thank you for doing that. Thank you for coming real and speaking truth. And not much else, guys. As I like to end these episodes, I don't have much homework for you at the moment. I generally like to just say, hey, go do something with this advice. But I think maybe off the back of what we were just discussing, if there's anyone in your life, I often end off with something like this, but is anyone in your life who you think needs to ask a question and they're just too scared to ask them, maybe you need to just encourage them to ask the question. Maybe it's an employee, maybe it's a spouse, maybe it's a kid, whatever it is, maybe you need to make that environment safe for them to ask that question so that there's less confusion in their life. But Shawnee, thank you, my bro. We'll
anytime.
Get ready for more of Shaun. I think he's got a wealth of knowledge. I'm stoked to have you here, dude, and we'll chat again soon.
Lovely to be here, Steve. Thanks for having me. We'll chat soon.
Short, brother.
Right.